Hi there, John McAdams here. Thanks a lot for joining me in episode 408 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. In this episode, we are talking about bullets ideally suited for hunting plains game in Africa. Now, several listeners requested an episode along these lines, so that's what we're going to talk about today. It will be just me in this episode. Now, I have hunted a lot of different African plains game with a lot of different bullet types in various chamberings. So in this episode, I'm going to share some of my most noteworthy experiences with a lot of different bullet models, and I will share some recommendations for you based upon my experiences. And I will also show examples of some of these bullets, some of which are unfired, some of which I shot into ballistic gel, some of which I have recovered from game animals, to those watching the video of this on YouTube. Now, before we get started talking about plains game hunting bullets, if you want to hunt Africa, we just opened bookings for 2027. We also still have a couple of spots remaining in South Africa for May, October, and November of 2026. Visit bestSafariHunt.com for more details on our hunts, or email me, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com. I will set you up with your dream hunt in Africa for plains game and or for Cape Buffalo. When you contact me, let me know that you are a podcast listener. I will give you a special bonus. Also, mark your calendar. I will be at the Safari Club International Convention in Nashville, 18 to 21 February 2026, with two of my African professional hunters. Johan and Kobus will both be there with me. I would love to meet you in person if you will be attending the show. We won't have a booth there, but we are hosting a get-together for podcast listeners and past/future clients on Friday, 20 February 2026 at the house we're staying at in town. Our address is in the episode description. We will be providing free pizza and alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages. Space is limited. Please RSVP, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com. Let me know that you are coming. We would love to see you there. Now, furthermore, I would also like to extend an invitation to you to join the community I am building on Patreon. I offer a lot of bonuses and exclusive content for supporters there, to include the ability to ask questions of future podcast guests, like we did with Kevin Robertson earlier this year. This actual episode topic I'm talking about today, plains game hunting bullets, was suggested by a couple of Patreon supporters, so that bumped it up higher on my list of priorities of things to do. So support me there, patreon.com/biggamehunter. Okay, let's get started talking about plains game hunting bullets. I want to first set conditions and expectations. I'm going to talk about a bunch of different bullets in this episode. I will share recommendations on the ones I think are best. You are welcome to agree or disagree with me here. And like I mentioned earlier, I have hunted with most of these bullets, but not every single one of them. So I'll just share what I know about those other bullets, what I've heard from other people. Also, don't take offense if I leave out your favorite bullet. And also, like I always say, if I say that we get more or less penetration with this bullet, or it made a larger or a smaller wound cavity, that doesn't necessarily mean, unless I specifically say so, that penetration was bad or that it made a very small wound that was inadequate for the task at hand. Like I always say, 100 is bigger than 99, but oftentimes that is not a significant difference, like we're talking about with 100 and the number 99. And also remember, this episode is about the best bullets for hunting plains game in Africa, not dangerous game. Maybe I will do that episode in the future. Now, I am defining plains game as thin-skinned, non-dangerous game. So no elephant, no buffalo, hippo, crocodile, lion, leopard, no giraffe either. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't potentially use some of these bullets on those animals, because some of them will work great under those circumstances, and some of them, and I will point this out, are outstanding all-purpose bullets for hunting in Africa. But I am focusing on bullets specifically on their utility for hunting plains game. So just focusing on plains game, we're talking about hunting game ranging in size from Diker and Klipspringer all the way up through Springbok, Blesbok, wildebeest, zebra, kudu, and even eland. And Eland are even bigger than Cape Buffalo. They're not as tough and they are not as dangerous as Cape Buffalo are, but they are still gigantic animals. Now, furthermore, Africa is a big place, very diverse place. It is not a single destination. Saying that you are hunting Africa is essentially the same as someone saying that they are hunting North America. That is a broad spectrum of game and hunting conditions that you can encounter in each one of those places. For instance, if you're hunting in the Kalahari or the Karoo versus the Bushveld, you're talking about places that might as well be on different planets from each other. Very open country where shots can be on the longer side in one with very little vegetation and very cover, versus areas in the Bushveld where the vegetation is much thicker, shot distances tend to be much closer. Generally speaking, though, there are exceptions. For the most part in Africa, you're talking about shots that are inside 200 yards, maybe 300, 350, maybe 400 yards in some parts of Africa, those more open places. But generally speaking, we're not talking about very long shots. Like I said, there are some exceptions. I'll address them as appropriate in this episode. But for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to focus on shots at the outside of, say, 200 to 300 yards at the longest, and then closer. Now, like I also mentioned, game varies quite a bit too, and something that works well for springbok might not work as well for kudu or eland. I often use the phrase, you must take what the bush gives you in Africa. That is a very common occurrence, to be out looking for one animal, like impala, but while you're out there hunting for impala, encounter a great wildebeest or kudu, or vice versa. So when you're hunting plains game on a mixed bag safari like this, if there's the potential that you're going to be hunting a wide spectrum of game and sizes and whatnot, you must be using a bullet that is appropriate for everything that you would be reasonably hunting in that area. It is also possible that you could encounter thick-skinned, dangerous game like buffalo while you're out hunting plains game. So for the purposes of this episode, I am assuming that you are a visiting hunter who is accompanied by a professional hunter who is suitably armed to protect you. So if you encounter a buffalo or an elephant by happenstance, they could deal with that dangerous situation if necessary. And I'm not relying on these bullets I'm going to recommend for you here to bail yourself out of trouble with a buffalo, for instance. And also, for the purposes of this discussion, I am assuming that you are going to hunt Africa, specifically to hunt plains game, with a cartridge in the 6mm to 375 caliber range. And I'm drawing that upper end at 375 caliber simply because so few people are using a 416 or a 458 or whatever exclusively for plains game. It does happen, but that is the exception more than the rule. Now, you could, of course, shoot a kudu or something like that with a big bore rifle on a combo buffalo plains game hunt. And of course, people do that. But I am primarily focused on plains game hunting with normal plains game cartridges in this episode. And I'm saying that because not all of these bullets I'm going to talk about in this episode are available in all calibers. A lot of them are kind of focused on that normal medium bore range that people are often hunting plains game with, 7mm, 30 caliber, things like that. There are exceptions. I'll talk about those as well. And I will also talk about some potential bullet choices in this episode that will work in some bigger bore rifles. Now, African game also has a reputation for toughness. I believe most of these animals are indeed very tough, but they're also not as tough as some people would have you believe. Now, this is for several reasons. First, we're primarily talking about hunting antelope in this episode, not deer. Their anatomy is similar to those of a deer, but they are not exactly the same. For the most part, on most species of African plains game, if you have a broadside shot, perfect shot placement is straight through the shoulder. You don't have as much room for error behind the shoulder like you would with a white-tailed deer, for instance. So you need to shoot them a little bit farther forward than you would a deer species. And this is part of the deal that I was referencing earlier. I think poor shots where people just hit a little bit too far back and the animal takes longer to die, you have a longer tracking job, things like that on an African antelope. I think that is responsible for a lot of the issues that people have with some of these animals being tougher to kill rather than them just being so big, so tough, bulletproof, things like that. Now, furthermore, some of these animals tend to stand quartering towards you if they know you are there. They'll give you that real tough shot, stand there, just look at you for a few seconds. And so that's how a lot of shots on some of these animals are taken. Now, that's not the case with all animals all the time, of course. And sometimes you can indeed get a broadside shot. I've shot plenty of animals straight through the shoulder, broadside like that, but I've also taken a lot of quartering shots on animals in Africa as well. And especially in the bushveld, sometimes the bush is so thick that you have to take what you can get, so to speak, when the animal's vitals are exposed through a window in the bush. So all of that is just my way of saying that ideally here, we want a bullet that is capable of reaching the vitals on a strongly quartering to animal that is very large, like a wildebeest or a kudu, at short range. And regardless of what some people might say, not all bullets offer reliable performance under those conditions. But some will. That's what we're talking about in this episode. And finally, some of these bullets are available basically in factory loads only, some essentially in hand loads only, some are available in both. I'm going to delineate which ones are available in which category there. Now, I have hunted with most, but not all of these bullets. I've used many of them in Africa, some of them in the USA. I will share some anecdotes and stories from my hunts and from people I know well that have used these bullets afield. Now, finally, just one last thing. I might not mention your favorite bullet in this episode. That doesn't mean I don't like it or that it won't work. It doesn't mean I think you are stupid for using it. I'm just representing my opinions on what I think is best based upon my experience. So let's get started talking about these plains game hunting bullets. After that long lead-in and introduction, we'll start with the various offerings from Barnes. The Barnes TSX, TTSX, and LRX. These are all very similar bullets. The TSX and the TTSX in particular are very highly regarded in Africa. Those two bullets are very, very similar. Essentially, the TTSX is the tipped version of the triple shock, which is the TSX, which just has a hollow point on it. They function in an almost identical manner, though. Now, the LRX bullet is similar to those, but it is usually optimized to have a higher ballistic coefficient, and it is optimized for performance at lower impact velocities. Now, the LRX will work fine in Africa, but it is usually not necessary because the shots tend to be shorter. So for that reason, the TSX and the TTSX are much more common. So I would say that there's no real reason not to use an LRX bullet if you're already set up to use them, your gun likes them, but I don't specifically recommend that bullet for most situations in hunting Africa. Now, if you're hunting in the Kalahari or the Karoo or something like that, where you have a longer range shot, you want a higher BC bullet, that's fine, use that. For the most part, I would say the TSX or the TTSX is the better choice of these three bullets. Now, the TSX and the TTSX, I think, are both fantastic choices for hunting plains game in Africa in general. I really actually don't have a preference for the TSX or the TTSX, one over the other for most conditions. Just choose what you can get, what shoots best in your rifle. I've used both. I've been very happy in each case. Now, copper bullets in general, to include the Barnes bullets, need lots of velocity for optimum performance. But that is compatible with most hunting situations in Africa where shots under 200 yards are very common. These bullets will give you lots of penetration and excellent expansion. So for those that are watching, this is a 270 grain TTSX I pulled out of a black wildebeest after I shot it with a 375 Ruger. But this is a very common sort of performance from a Barnes bullet over there. You can almost pull this out of a Barnes advertisement. Now, these bullets are not without downsides. Penetration can be too much sometimes, and you have higher risk of an exit with a Barnes bullet. Many of these bullets will exit, but the Barnes bullets often tend to. Now, you should always be aware of what is beyond your target when you are hunting, but that is especially important when you are hunting with Barnes bullets. That is especially true if you are hunting a herd animal. you don't want to accidentally hit two animals with the same shot. And many of the animals that people hunt in Africa are herd animals, and you'll be shooting one out of a big group. So be very cognizant of that. Now, I have often found that penetration can sometimes be erratic with Barnes bullets. And what I mean by that is when these bullets hit, the petals tend to fold back. Now, sometimes, depending on what they hit, depending on the velocity of the impact, a petal will veer off at a weird angle, or it will completely break off. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And when that does happen, the bullet can veer off as it penetrates in one direction or another, and it'll penetrate a long distance, but not necessarily in a straight line. I would say that of all the Barnes bullets, that is more common with an LRX at close range, but it does happen with the others as well. And that is one of the reasons why I tend to shy away from the LRX in particular in Africa, unless you know that you are primarily taking a longer range shot. Now, to be clear, this sort of performance can happen with any bullet. It is not limited just to Barnes bullets, but I have found it happens more with Barnes bullets than with any other hunting bullet I have used. And I'm also not saying that it happens, that it is a common occurrence with Barnes bullets. It happens more with them than with others in my experience, but that is still unusual for that to happen. Now, furthermore, another downside of a Barnes bullet, and really most copper bullets, is the wounds tend to be narrower with any copper bullet, like a Barnes bullet, than with a lead core bullet under similar conditions. In particular, though, this is kind of unique to the Barnes bullets, just the way that they expand, is they tend to expand in an X shape like this, where the petals fold back. So even though you may get, and often will get, about 2x expansion of these bullets at the widest part, because it doesn't expand in a traditional mushrooming shape, the surface area of the bullet is less. So the Barnes bullet will penetrate more, but it will cause less tissue damage than something that expands in a more typical mushrooming shape. Now, I'm not trying to talk trash about Barnes bullets or any of that stuff. I'm not saying they're bad, but this is that example of what I'm talking about, of 99 being less than 100. So with all that said, the Barnes TSX and TTSX are some of my most favorite bullets for hunting in general, to include Africa. Many outfitters are very happy when they see that their client has showed up and they have Barnes bullets. We actually use them ourselves in our plains game rifle in South Africa for many years. We use a 210 or a 225 grain TTSX in the 338 Win Mag. It worked awesome. And we also use them in our 375s on buffalo. We've killed literally truckloads of animals with those bullets. They have performed wonderfully for us. And actually, funny enough, I think the first animal I ever killed with a Barnes bullet was with our client rifle in Africa many years ago. And actually, it was this bullet that I pulled out of it. Black wildebeest, about 240 yards away, 270 grain TTSX from a 375 Ruger. Very close to broadside shot on this animal. I hit him directly in the heart. And when we did a necropsy on that animal later, the heart had essentially exploded. We found pieces of the heart scattered all inside his thoracic cavity, blew a gigantic hole about the size of my fist through his lungs. That wildebeest ran a short distance, fell down, got up, was unsteady, fell back down again, and that was it. And actually, that video is on YouTube of how that animal reacted to the shot. I made a great shot on that animal, but that bullet performed wonderfully as well. I also shot a American bison with a 300 grain TSX several years ago. So that's, it's a little bit different design than the TTSX because it was heavier and it was out of a 375 H&H instead of a 375 Ruger. It was also going slower. In this case, it was about a 120-yard shot. I shot it a couple of times, even though this first shot with the 375 was fatal. One of these shots in particular, I got a real good wound track on that was just very easy to find in the animal. I hit him on his right side, slightly quartering away at the back of the lungs, found it up here in the shoulder. Bullet went through both lungs, made a wound almost the size of the bottom of a Coke can through both lungs. And the bullet it looked very, very similar to this 270 grain TTSX when I recovered it. So great expansion, great terminal performance, great penetration. Now, the Barnes bullet is an example of a great all-around bullet choice. You can use them on plains game. You can also use them on thick-skinned dangerous game like buffalo. Either one, the other, or both, the TSX and the TTSX are available from 22 caliber all the way up through 5.77 nitro. So you have a lot of options with it. You can get them as component bullets. You can get them as factory ammo. Now, moving on, Hornady makes a very similar bullet called the CX. It's also a copper bullet. Similar, but not the same. But the overall performance that you're going to get with this bullet is very, very similar to what you would get with a Barnes. A more narrow wound compared to a lead core bullet, but great penetration. Here is a 180 grain CX. Here's a 180 grain TTSX. So the way it expands is a little bit different from the TTSX, more of a typical circular mushroom type shape in terms of frontal surface area than the Barnes. I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. They both work about the same, though. I've killed several animals with the CX. In particular, shot impala and blue wildebeest with 160 grain CX from my 7 PRC in 2023 on a hunt in Africa. The impala story was especially noteworthy. We were walking through the bush, Philemon and Kobus and I, and he spotted movement, stopped me. Turned out to be a small group of impala moving left or right through the bush in front of us. He said that, told me to get ready. He said that the last one in the herd is going to be the nice male. And so we saw a couple females, a couple young males walk by. I was ready to go on the sticks. He said, I'm going to whistle and stop him. And he whistled. Sure enough, impala stopped perfectly in an open spot. It was only 30, 40 yards away from me. Shot him right on the shoulder. Staggered, took off running, went 20 yards after the shot. And this shot literally blew his lung out of the exit wound on it. Inflicted massive damage to that impala. Great performance. Also worked well on the wildebeest I shot later, but I shot him in the neck, instantly dropped. There was a lot of bullets that would have worked just fine in that case. Steve, who was on the podcast hunt with me in 2025, also used 160 grain CX bullets out of his 7 PRC. If memory serves me right, he killed mountain reedbuck, zebra, black wildebeest, and Gemsbach with those bullets. They all worked wonderfully for him too. If I recall correctly, he recovered one bullet. I think it was from the Gemsbach. Hornady makes the CX in 22 caliber through 375 caliber. That bullet tops out at about a 250 grain 375 caliber bullet you could use in the 375 Ruger or H&H. That bullet would work for buffalo, but it is a little bit too light for most people's tastes, but it's just fine for plains game, though. You can get component bullets for it to hand load yourself. You can also get factory loads from Hornady in their Outfitter and Superformance line. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of all the different copper bullets or any of that stuff, but companies other than Hornady and Barnes make good copper bullets too. For instance, I shot a Federal Trophy copper bullet out of my 300 Win Mag, 180 grain bullet, killed my first elk with it. Devastating performance too. No doubt that bullet would have performed in a very similar manner on a kudu or whatever. And like I said, there are other companies that make other copper bullets. You're all going to get that same sort of performance. It's really just a matter of what you can get, what shoots well in your rifle. Now, those are all kind of typical copper bullets that mushroom in a more traditional manner like that or have petals that peel back. There are a couple of others that are made out of copper that are worth mentioning. For instance, stuff from Lehigh Defense, hammer bullets, cutting edge. They're not the only ones, but those are a couple of the most noteworthy ones. Those bullets are not identical to each other, but they all perform in a non-traditional manner where the petals of those bullets are designed to break off and then they radiate outwards and forwards as the bullet penetrates through whatever medium it is going through. And then the rear shank of the bullet will also continue to penetrate. So the idea is to get the best of both worlds here. You have fragmentation that causes a very large wound, sort of like a lead core bullet, but not quite as dramatic as what you get with a lead core bullet. And that's what you get with these petals that break off. But you'd also get the great penetration of a copper bullet with that rear shank that continues to penetrate. I do not have personal hunting experience with any of those bullets, so I can't speak personally to how well they work on game. I've shot the Lehigh bullets into ballistic gel from a 300 blackout. They did perform, they look like they performed as advertised, though. Guys like Joseph von Benedict, Ron Spomer, Richard Mann have all spoken very highly of some of those different types of bullets hunting different species of game all over the world. In particular, Richard discusses an incident in episode, I think 401, where he was on the podcast with me, where his wife killed a blue wildebeest with one of those bullets. I think it was a Lehigh bullet. Said that she made a very poor shot, basically just grazed the brisket of this wildebeest. But one of the petals from that bullet angled upwards and caused a very severe, ultimately fatal wound to the cardiothoracic cavity of that wildebeest. Now, these are not very mainstream bullets, but that also doesn't mean they won't work either. They are available mainly as component bullets, but there are some factory loads with some of those different bullets in some chamberings. So take all that for what you will. Now let's talk about one of my favorite bullets for hunting in general, but particularly in Africa. This is the Nosler partition. This is the bullet that made Nosler, the bullet company. I won't go into the details of John Nosler's famous story involving the moose, but I'll just say this. This is a very, very old bullet. Came out in the 1940s, but it works about as well today as it did back then. Now, the partition is not a bonded bullet, but it has a physical partition between the front and rear core of the bullet. And you can kind of see that right here. Now, this gives you, the idea with this bullet is to give you the best of both worlds. You get a massive wound cavity, lots of fragmentation, with also outstanding penetration. When I shoot the partition in almost any chambering into ballistic gel, it'll often deliver one of the widest wounds I've ever seen for that chambering, combined with absolutely outstanding penetration. Also very close to best of class penetration there as well. Now, on the downside though, the partition is a difficult bullet to manufacture. Instead of just a simple jacketed bullet with a lead core swedged into it, you have two separate lead cores that are swedged into this bullet with a physical partition between them. So it makes it more difficult to manufacture, more expensive to manufacture. So they are pricey. And they can also be difficult to get good accuracy with it. And I'm not saying that you're always going to get bad accuracy with it or any of that stuff, but they can be a finicky bullet along those lines. Now, the partition also tends to have a lower ballistic coefficient. But I will say that's not an issue most of the time for most people, especially hunting in Africa. Now, I used 300 grain Nosler partitions from my 4570 on my very first hunt in Africa. Performance was awesome. Zero complaints about how they performed. I killed game like hartebeest and gemsbok with it. And actually, for what it's worth, that 300 grain partition from a 4570 I used on what was my very longest shot on a game animal for many years, like 360 yards. I won't go into the details of that story here, but that hartebeest was standing broadside to me. I hit him squarely through both shoulders, broke both shoulders, and he just went straight down right there. Did recover the bullet from it. This is that mangled bullet that I was showing you. But that is also what happens when you go through the shoulders of a sizable animal like that. A hartebeest isn't giant. It's not as big as a blue wildebeest or a kudu, but it's also a big, tough animal like that. I hit him low through the chest, so it went right through that knuckle on his shoulder. And but it still held together and dropped him like there, like I said, even after all of that. Now, you can get a partition in factory ammo from both directly from Nosler and from Federal, for instance, in some cartridges. You can also get it as a component bullet. You can get them in some bigger bore offerings. Unfortunately, this 300 grain 4570 or 45 caliber load, I don't think they make that anymore. But you can get it in 375 caliber, for instance, though. These bullets will work great on buffalo, but they're not my favorite bullet for use on buffalo and the like, though. But I think the partition is ideally suited for plains game. You can, of course, get it in the normal calibers people would use for that. 6.5 millimeter, 270, 7 millimeter, 30 caliber, etc. And as far as I know, you can currently get the bullet from 22 caliber through 375 caliber in component bullet form. This is another awesome bullet. Almost any outfitter would love for you to bring a partition in your rifle over there. In particular, 180 grain partition in something like a 300 Win Mag or a 30-06 is a wonderful choice. Now, I will talk very briefly about the RWS H-Mantel. Now, this bullet is similar to the partition, but it is a German bullet. This bullet has a very tough rear lead core and a very soft front lead core. It is separated by an H-shaped crimp in the jacket. Does not have a full partition like the Nosler partition does, though. But the effect is the same. You get a massive wound, lots of fragmentation from that front core with deep penetration from that rear lead core as it continues to penetrate. So this bullet tends to have a front core that will almost completely fragment when it hits, but then you'll have an almost wad cutter shaped rear core that will continue to penetrate, often will exit. And it tends to leave a very clean, freely bleeding cookie cutter type entrance and exit wound. And so that combination actually tends to be pretty good at hide preservation too. You don't get a big exit wound with these, like I said, about caliber size entrance and exit wound, but because it has a cutting edge on that instead of a blunt mushroom type shape, it tends to actually bleed very well. Instead of punching through, it cuts through. Now, like the partition, the RWS H-Mantel was also very, very expensive. A very highly engineered bullet. And actually, I don't even think you can get it anymore. I've heard that RWS has discontinued the H-Mantel. They have replaced it with a bullet. I think it is the Speed Tip Professional. I have no experience with that newer bullet. The design and performance do seem similar, just that the Speed Tip Professional has a higher ballistic coefficient. I have killed feral hogs, deer, and black bear with an H-Mantel in the USA. In Africa, I have killed zebra, impala, baboon with it. That was all on the hunt in Zimbabwe. Wonderful results in each case. In particular, killed an impala on the very last day of my hunt there. Last light on the last day. I had just minutes of shooting light left when I shot this impala. About a 120-yard shot, not very far. Shot it out of my 9.3. It's a 258 grain RWS H-Mantel. Close to broadside, hit him square through the shoulder. He ran a few yards and then pinwheeled. Very clean entrance and exit wounds, just like you like to see, but it looked like a hand grenade went off in the chest cavity of that impala. So I think the H-Mantel was an awesome bullet, but it is a very niche bullet. I've hunted with it a lot, but I'm sure a lot of Germans have too. And if you're in Europe and you've used it, feel free to email me, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com. Let me know your thoughts on this projectile. But for the most people, it's not really an option anymore. I just mention it because it's something that I have used a lot in Africa. Now, switching back to Nosler. Nosler makes another awesome bullet for hunting in Africa, the AccuBond. I have one right here. This is, in general, another just outstanding bullet. And this bullet has a more traditional bonded core design. This is actually Nosler's most popular projectile, and for good reason. It's outstanding. It is easier to tune for accuracy than the partition. Often guns that don't shoot a partition well will shoot an AccuBond well. It also has a little bit more aerodynamic shape too, and the terminal performance on these bullets tends to be devastating. Generally, penetration isn't as deep with an AccuBond versus a partition, but it still penetrates well, also makes a very large wound. And this bullet expands in a more traditional manner. You get a very beautiful mushroomed bullet when you pull it out of an animal, if you do indeed recover it. It is considered by many, to include me, a little bit too soft for buffalo, though you can get them in 375 caliber, but this is a perfect bullet for use on the cats and especially on plains game. You can get it in factory ammo. You can get it in component bullets, 22 caliber through 375 caliber. Really not too much to say about the AccuBond other than it is awesome. Another great choice. Now let's talk about a different bullet, the Speer Impact. This is a newer bullet. It's only a couple years old. Now, Speer is most famous for their Gold Dot handgun bullet. Now, the Speer Impact uses a similar process of manufacturing, and it's not constructed in exactly the same way as the AccuBond, but it is similar. You get a little bit more streamlined aerodynamic shape with a bonded lead core. I killed an elk with the 175 grain spear impact out of a 7 PRC this past fall. The results were devastating. It looked like someone turned on a hose of blood after I hit that elk. The bullet did exit. The penetration was good in gel, but the bullet expanded to a massive, massive size. Remember, this is just a 7mm bullet. Very high weight retention on it, massive shape, and penetration isn't as good as what I've gotten out of, say, AccuBond or a partition, but it is still towards the upper end, still adequate. Like I said, it exited that elk when I shot it. This is an under-the-radar pick because it is so new, but it will darn sure work in Africa. Now, like I said, I killed that elk with it. I would have no compunctions or no reservations at all about using it on anything I would reasonably hunt with a 7 PRC in Africa, impala, wildebeest, kudu, zebra, all of that stuff. In fact, Hootie Hoo actually used the spear impact bullet out of his 30-06 on a hunt with us in 2024. I think that bullet was 172 grains. He killed blue wildebeest and zebra with it. Very happy with how it performed. And accuracy was good for him. It was also very good for me, too. I've said in the past that I was pleasantly surprised with how well that ammo, this bullet, performed for me. I had very low expectations for it, but it really exceeded it. Very happy with how it performed. You can get loaded ammo with the spear impact bullet in Remington's Premier long range line. I think you can also get this as a component bullet directly from Spear, too. All right, moving on. We have another bonded bullet, the Norma Oryx. Let's see here. Yeah, this is it. This is an older bullet. I think it came out mid-90s. Norma is a Swedish company, uses a traditional bonded core design. It's available in a wide range of calibers, 22 to 375 caliber in component form, and as loaded ammo from Norma. Now, Norma also makes a newer bullet they call the Bond Strike. It is similar to the Oryx in many ways, traditional bonded bullet. The Bond Strike just has a polymer tip and a higher ballistic coefficient. Now, the Bond Strike is quite a bit newer. It's only a few years old. You don't have as many options with it, but I think you have 6mm, 6.5mm, 7mm, and 30 caliber versions of that bullet. Now, Norma is a gigantic company, especially in Europe, but they have experienced a lot of growth in the USA in the last couple of years. Now, I'll confess, I have not hunted with the Norma Oryx or the Bond Strike. I have heard a lot of good things about the Oryx in particular. The Oryx has shot very accurately from me out of my rifle in the little bit of testing I've done so far. I've talked to some podcast listeners that have used it for hunting various animals out of various chamberings, and they said it actually shot surprisingly well for them, too. This is a lower BC bullet, but once again, not an issue for most circumstances. You're using it, something like a 300 Win Mag or something along those lines, 30-06, 200, 300-yard shot, well within the capabilities of this bullet. And the nice thing about a lot of this Norma ammo is it isn't that expensive either. One of the guys I was talking to, Mike, was telling me that his rifle and 300 Win Mag shot the Norma Oryx more accurately than anything else. It also happened to be the cheapest ammo that he could find in it, and it performed great on it on an elk that he shot with it this past year too. So a lot to like about this stuff. Moving on, we have the Woodleigh weld core. Now, Woodleigh is a polarizing bullet company. Some people love them, others do not. Woodleigh also had the misfortune of having a fire burn down their factory accidentally a few years ago. Now, I have shot some Woodleigh solids myself. I was not pleased with how they performed. I would not use those bullets again. But I really don't have any personal experience at all with the weld core bullet. But like I said, some people love them. In particular, Phil Massaro has spoken very highly of the Woodleigh weld core in his 318 Wesley Richards. That's also actually something that Woodleigh has going for them, in that they make bullets in unusual calibers like that, and they serve kind of those underserved portions of the market. And of course, they also make bullets in more popular chamberings too. So that's really all I'm going to say about them. If they work for you and you like them and all that stuff, by all means, and you can get them, Availability has been kind of shaky with them, especially with the fire, but they have rebuilt. They are getting stuff back out there again. But if they, if you like them, you can get them. They shoot accurately for you. All that stuff, by all means, use them. I have no reason to tell you not to use a weld core. All right. Moving on, we have the Swift A-frame. This is another older bullet, came out in 1980s. Now, we'll start with the bad stuff with this bullet. Like the A-frame, it is expensive. It also has a lower ballistic coefficient. But putting those things aside, have kind of the same cons as the partition. They are another great bullet. They are designed in a similar manner to the Nosler partition. They do have a physical partition through the middle of them, but unlike the Nosler bullet, the A-frame actually has a bonded front core. So it is a tougher bullet than the Nosler partition. You will typically get a larger frontal diameter with a A-frame than you will with a partition in a given chambering. You'll also get a little bit less fragmentation, more weight retention with the A-frame. But you also generally won't get a wound that is as big with an A-frame versus a partition. But I'll say it is big, but not so big, as they say in Africa. But once again, 100 is bigger than 99. We're talking small differences here. This bullet will also give you outstanding penetration. Now, Swift makes the A-frame in a standard and a heavy configuration. The standard configuration is available in 25 caliber through 35 caliber, and so it is designed for optimum performance on the game animals you would normally hunt with those caliber bullets. The heavy A-frame is available 9.3 millimeter through 505 and 510 caliber. Those bullets are designed for use on thick-skinned, dangerous game like buffalo, hippo, and the like. They also make the A-frame in a flat-tipped lever action model designed for use in lever action guns. For instance, you can get a 350 grain 4.58 caliber that is perfect for a 45-70. The A-frame is a very highly regarded bullet for use on buffalo in an appropriate chambering. Awesome bullet for that. The A-frame will work just fine on plains game. It is an excellent bullet if you want a single projectile to hunt plains game and buffalo on a hunt. But if you are only hunting plains game, there's another bullet Swift makes that I think is better suited for you, and that is the Swift Scirocco. That is a little bit newer bullet, came out in the 1990s. The Scirocco is also a bonded core bullet. The A-frame has a bonded front core and a physical partition. The Scirocco lacks a physical partition and is just a traditional bonded bullet. It also has a little bit more aerodynamic design. It also has a polymer tip and a boat tail on it. But this is one of those bullets that, like I said, it's bonded. It is good for use at a little bit longer range than the A-frame, I think, is best suited for because it is a little bit more aerodynamic, but it is also plenty tough for use up close. They make the Scirocco in 22 caliber through 338 caliber. Now, you can get the A-frame and the Scirocco in both component bullet and factory ammo form. Matt Tyree, who is actually the recipient of the safari hunt that we donated to an Army veteran in 2025, used 180 grain Sciroccos out of his 300 Win Mag on that hunt. He hammered everything that he shot with them. In particular, he made an especially nice shot on his Warthog. Warthog, especially in this area, tend to be pretty skittish, and they often are moving with a purpose, and you need to be on the ball to shoot one. And also, they are short animals, low to the ground, and it doesn't take grass that is very high to obscure them. So in any case, he saw this Warthog moving, and it went and stopped behind a bush. He got ready to shoot, and when the Warthog came out, it was on the move. He swung through with it, aimed at his head and his neck, and ended up hitting him perfectly just in front of the shoulder and pinwheeled that Warthog with that Scirocco. And that was the end of that Warthog. And, of course, he killed zebra and wildebeest that are bigger and tougher than a Warthog. All that worked awesome in each case. So I think the Scirocco of Swift's two bullets is the better bullet for use on plains game. There's no reason not to use an A-frame, though. If you have them, you'd like them. They shoot fine for you, all that. But all other things being equal, I would choose the Scirocco if I had to use one of these Swift bullets and I was only hunting plains game. They are not quite as pricey as an A-frame, but they are still pretty expensive. Now, The availability of Swift bullets these last couple of years has been terrible. Terrible with a capital T. They actually have some of the worst availability out of any American manufactured bullet. COVID really messed up a lot of things for a lot of companies. Swift was a company that has taken a lot longer to recover than, companies like Federal, Remington, all that stuff. That is especially true with the A-frame bullet from Swift. Fortunately, that does seem to be changing. That's great because both of them are excellent bullets for hunting Africa. Availability is still not where the company wants them to be, but it is better than it used to be, seems to be heading in the right direction. All right, so we just talked about a lot of different bullets with either a partition or a bonded core design or copper bullets like the Barnes and the CX and whatnot at the beginning. We'll switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about 4 different bullets that all have a similar design to each other that is different from anything we've talked about to this point. All of these bullets have a bonded front core and a solid rear shank. So the partition, the A-frame, have a physical partition. The A-frame has a bonded front core. The Accubon, the Oryx, the Scirocco, all of them are more typical bonded bullets. Well, these are different from all of those. Similar, but their own flavor of doing things. So first up, we have the trophy bonded bear claw. This, the 1980s was kind of a renaissance for a lot of controlled expansion bullets. A lot of stuff came along then. The trophy bonded bear claw was one such bullet. This bullet was designed by a guy named Jack Carter. Now, this was the original bullet in this sort of design. Now, I want to say Federal bought out Jack Carter in the 1990s. They continued to manufacture the trophy bonded bear claw to this day. Now, the bear claw at one point was offered in a wide range of bullet calibers. I actually have some 7 Rim Mag and 30-06 trophy bonded bear claws. They have been discontinued in those smaller bores, and they are now primarily a larger bore design. This one I'm holding in my hand is a 400 grain 4.58 cal from a 4.58 Win Mag. As far as I know, 375 caliber is the smallest caliber trophy bonded bear claw Federal makes right now. They say that they make them as component bullets, but finding a component bear claw is very hard to do these days, and they are mainly offered as loaded ammo. Now, I used a 400 grain bear claw from a 4.58 Win Mag a couple years ago, killed a giant feral hog with it. That shot dumped him right there. That is actually one of the most impressive kills that I've ever caught on camera. But that's a non-typical use for this bullet. Normally, especially with them being used mainly in the bigger bore stuff, it's usually a dangerous game bullet these days. Now, the downsides of the bear claw are its rarity in component form, rarity in smaller caliber offerings, and its price. And they also have a very low BC. But like I keep saying, even though a bullet has a low BC, for the most part, not really an issue in Africa. Now, I will say, though, that Federal has corrected that shortcoming with their trophy bonded tipped bullet. This bullet has a very similar design to the old bear claw, but just a sleeker profile. It has a boat tail, a little bit more stretched out, sleeker design, also has a polymer tip on it. So it also looks cool too. This bullet is made in smaller calibers, 270 to 338 caliber. You can also get it in loaded ammo. You can also get it in component form. Now, the Federal Terminal Ascent is the latest iteration of this design. This bullet is just a couple years old. It has an even more sleek profile than the trophy bonded tip. It is also designed to expand at lower impact velocities too. But with all that said, I talk about these bullets having a more sleek profile, being optimized for use at extended range. Yeah, they will do that, especially the Terminal Ascent. If you need to take a shot at 500, 600 yards or whatever. I'm not going to get into the ethics of doing that, but those bullets are designed to work well at extended range, low impact velocities like that. But because of their design, or rather they are designed in such a manner that they will still perform well at a close range shot too. And as a matter of fact, a lot of my clients have used the Terminal Ascent with great results on plains game in Africa at very close range. I myself have actually used 170 grain Terminal Ascent on a moose hunt in Colorado 2024. Awesome performance. That was about 130-ish yard shot. I hit that moose twice. In each case, that bullet made wounds about the width of the bottom of a Coke can, went straight through the lungs each time both shots exited. I could see steam coming out of the entrance and exit wounds of that moose right as it tipped over. So great performance. You get a wide wound cavity, outstanding penetration with these bullets. Now, the terminal ascent is mainly available from Federal as loaded ammo. 6.5 Creedmoor through 300 Win Mag. Component bullets do exist too. I have seen them, but they are notoriously difficult to find. But the loaded ammo actually seems to be pretty easy to find these days, at least as far as premium ammo like that goes. Like I said, I've had good results with the 7 PRC. A lot of clients have used it. 30-06, 300 Win Mag, 300 Short Mag. It's also worked great for them too. So don't be turned off by the fact that Federal advertises that it's a good long-range bullet. It is, but that is also something that I would feel very comfortable using on anything you would reasonably hunt with a 30-06 or something like that inside 200 yards too. Now, next, we have another classic Africa hunting bullet in this same sort of design family, and that is the North Fork Semi-Spitzer. Now, this bullet was designed by Mike Brady in 1996. The company has gone through a lot of changes in ownership over the years. Long story short, I am currently one of the owners right now in 2026. I bought into the company last year. Design of the Semi-Spitzer is very similar to the trophy bonded Bear Claw. Not exactly the same, though. We use a slightly different bonding process. Front core still bonded, just bonded in a little bit different manner. Slight differences in the materials used in it as well. Now, the trophy bonded Bear Claw has a couple of big grooves cut into the jacket. This is a 300 grain 375 caliber bullet. You see, it just has a couple of grooves cut into it, whereas the Semi-Spitzer has a bunch of very small ones. We call it smart band technology. The idea here is to reduce pressures and barrel fouling with those tiny grooves like that. Now, we make a very similar bullet called the percussion point. It uses the same general design principles as the Semi-Spitzer, but the percussion point is only available in bullets 375 caliber and larger. Sort of like the A-frame, the larger caliber Semi-Spitzers are optimized for performance, or sort of like the heavy A-frame, these larger caliber Semi-Spitzers are optimized for performance on thick-skinned, dangerous game like buffalo. The percussion point is designed to be a little bit softer, open up a little bit faster for use on animals like cats and plains game. Now, the percussion point is great for use, like I said, cats and plains game if you have a 375 or a 416 or whatever. But the Semi-Spitzer is designed for use on the animals that you would be hunting with a 30-06 or a 7mm or whatever. So we don't make a percussion point in the smaller calibers, but don't worry, those smaller caliber percussion points are going to give you the great performance that you want with a wide wound and deep penetration. So right here I have a 25 caliber, a 7mm here in the middle, and a 30 caliber Semi-Spitzer. I pulled all of these out of gel. Wonderful performance in each case. Near best in class penetration and wound cavity diameter for each one. Now, as you might have seen, the Semi-Spitzer is another one of these flat-based bullets. These bullets are known for exceptional accuracy. They tend to be very easy to tune for accuracy, and they shoot well in a variety of calibers, weights, and in rifles. So, like I kind of mentioned, that bonded front core is designed to expand to a very large frontal diameter and retain a lot of weight. And so we get a great weight forward design for deep straight line penetration. I'm not saying it never happens, but it is unusual for these bullets to tumble in an animal. So the idea here is, and the result here is, you get a very large wound, like I said, deep straight line penetration. Now, I have, like I said, shot 25 cal out of a 25 Creedmoor, 7mm out of a 7 PRC, and 30 caliber bullets out of a 30-06 in ballistic gel. I've also used the 375 caliber in gel. And like I said, the North Fork is always one of the best performers in terms of wound size and depth of penetration. Now, in particular, check out my 375 H&H gel test video on YouTube to see how the North Fork Semi-Spitzer stacks up against the Hornady Interlock and DGX Bonded, the Swift A-Frame, the Barnes TSX, and the Trophy Bonded Bear Claw. Link is in the episode description. Now, we make the North Fork Semi-Spitzer in a variety of bullet weights, starting at 25 caliber all the way up through 474 caliber to use in a 470 Nitro Express. I've used the 120 grain Semi-Spitzer out of a 25 Creedmoor on a Vol Reedbuck and in Yala. My son also shot his Impala with it. I also shot that load into a dead buffalo as well. I'll tell you about that here in a second. I've used 140 grain Semi-Spitzer out of a 6.5 PRC, killed a massive hog. That actually might be the biggest one that I've ever killed and put on a scale. I used 160 grain Semi-Spitzer from my 7 PRC. That was the other rifle with the 25 Creedmoor I took to Africa in 2025. I killed mountain zebra and blue wildebeest with it. I've also used the 180 grain Semi-Spitzer out of a 30-06, killed blue wildebeest and Impala with that. And the 300 grain Semi-Spitzer out of a 375 H&H, killed a Blessbach. These bullets all delivered some of the most devastating wounds I have ever observed in any animal. They will make a big hole through the tissue it hits. And of course, the size of that wound does vary in size with the bullet and whatnot. But looking at something on the level of the diameter of the bottom of a Coke can here, maybe a little bigger, maybe a little smaller, but it also does some other stuff that I've not observed with any other bullets. Now, you take a soft lead core bullet like an ELD-X that will fragment when it hits something. That'll also make a big hole through tissue, and there will be lots of secondary wounds around that main wound track that will range in size from, say, peppering the neighboring tissue to shredding it. It all depends kind of on the details here. The Semi-Spitzer, though, and I've observed this, like I said, in multiple animals, in multiple diameter bullets, the 25 cal, the 30 cal, the 6.5 millimeter, all that, it tends to devastate tissue. And I've opened up wounds or opened up the chest cavity of many animals, and I'll see giant chunks of lung just completely detached from the rest of the organ. And this is, of course, in addition to the normal wound, where the main body of the bullet hits, where it blows through it. Like I said, multiple bullets, multiple animals I've seen this on. So it's not just a one-off occurrence. And like I also said, too, it's not something I have observed with any other bullet. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens enough that I thought it was worth mentioning. I was very impressed every time I've seen that. Of course, that also just is inflicting that much more damage to the vital organs of the animal, kills it that much faster. Now, I've talked a lot about how great these bullets are. They are not perfect. Like a lot of these other bullets I've talked about, the North Fork Semi-Spitzer has a very low ballistic coefficient. It's on par with a Federal Fusion or a Remington Corelock, something like that. Not an issue at typical hunting ranges, especially in Africa. But depending on the chambering that you're using it in, I wouldn't shoot past 300 to 400 yards with one. These bullets are also expensive too. On average, they're probably the most expensive bullet out of everything I talk about in this episode. They're not radically different from other premium bullets, but they are still pricey. Now, availability of North Fork bullets has also been erratic over the past few years as the company has gone through an ownership change, and we've had to adapt to manufacturing, moving it from the USA to Sweden, which is where we make them now, and dealing with COVID and all of that stuff. Things are still not where I want them to be in terms of availability, but it is getting better. And we have been making some changes to the way we manufacture these bullets to better fill demand. I'm not saying that we have changed the design, but we've just streamlined our manufacturing process a little bit. And also the other downside of these bullets is they are mainly available as component bullets for hand loaders right now. You can get loaded ammo with North Fork bullets from some custom hand loaders. Lonnie Cribb with Superior Ammunition in South Carolina is a prime example. You can also get them from Pendleton Ammo, also from Hendershots. Now, Hendershots and Pendleton do list some stuff on their websites. You can order a 375 caliber with a 300 grain Semi-Spitzer, for instance. but you can also call them and do full custom loads. Call them or email them. So if you have, say, a 458 Win Mag or some cartridge that they don't list semi-spitzer bullets as available for as an option, you can email them or call them and say, hey, can you put this bullet in this chambering for me? And usually they will say yes. I've done that in the past before, and it's worked out fine. Other people as well have too. Jimmy Epperson, who I had on the show back in 2025, he was a client of ours that hunted with us in South Africa. He also happened to be using North Fork bullets, completely separate from any of my association with the company. He just bought them because he heard good things about them. He called up Hindershots, had them make a custom hand load for him with his 338 Rum. I think he was using 250 grain semi-spitzers with it. It also worked awesome for him. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I shot a dead buffalo with my 25 Creedmoor with North Fork bullets. So I don't want this to be like a 257 Roy Weatherby story, killing the Cape buffalo or any of that. I'm going to make it very clear. It was a dead buffalo. I was on the podcast hunt with a couple of podcast listeners this past summer. Guy shot this buffalo. It was already dead. Done taking pictures, all that stuff with his permission. I shot it at a very steeply quartering angle, straight through that near side shoulder blade, just to see how it would perform. I wanted to see what it would look like. I can tell you the penetration was outstanding. Punched all the way through that shoulder blade, made a nice wound, surprisingly large wound through the vitals of that buffalo. I don't know what it looked like because I didn't recover it. Like I said, these bullets will penetrate great, and they will make an impressive wound when they are used appropriately. I'm not endorsing the 25 Creedmoor or any Creedmoor for use on Cape buffalo, but that was a tough test of that bullet, and it performed very well. Now, I will admit that I am biased, but if you want a recommendation on a bullet to use on a plains game hunt in Africa, dangerous game as well, inappropriate chamberings, but we're talking about plains game, this is the number one recommendation that I would give you. Now, the reason why I bought into the company was because I think these bullets are so awesome and because they are my number one choice, not the other way around. Now, so far we have discussed copper, partition style, and various different types of bonded bullets, so-called premium bullets. Let's switch gears and talk about two other bullet types. We're going to talk eventually about plain old cup and core bullets, but first we're going to talk about solids. Yes, solids. I can hear somebody saying right now, John, why are we talking about solids for use on plains game? We're not talking about hunting buffalo or elephant here. We're talking about plains game. Well, there are some situations where a solid bullet is actually the best choice. And specifically, I'm talking about hunting the smaller antelope, the so-called tiny 10. We're talking about stuff like Diker, Steenbok, Greisbach, Klipspringer, Dick, and the like. These are small, fragile creatures, especially the little Klipspringer. All of those animals are in the 20 to 60 pound range. Now, many years ago, about 2014, hunting in South Africa, got on a beautiful, very large Steenbok, shot him with a 30-06 through the shoulder using a traditional soft point bullet. Made a giant mess out of it. Had about a baseball-sized exit wound on that animal, and especially relative to the body size of that animal, it was horrific. The taxidermist had his work cut out for him there. Well, if I would have used a solid, you avoid that issue. I'm not saying there's going to be no high damage, but you're going to get a lot less damage from a solid than you would with a soft point bullet. And since we're talking about very small antelope to begin with, the fact that you're using a solid that is going to cause a very narrow wound through the body cavity, it's still going to kill the animal very quickly if you make a good shot. So let's say that you're using a 375 or a 416 on a hunt, say for a thick-skinned dangerous game like buffalo. It is not a bad practice to have some solids on hand for backing shots on that buffalo. Well, you can use that same solid out of your rifle for use on those smaller animals. For instance, you could shoot a Diker with your buffalo gun, for instance, using one of those solids. Now, the problem with solids is that they are typically only available in those larger bores. You're not going to have a lot of 7mm, 6.5mm, 30 caliber solid bullet options. There is one exception to that, though, and that is the North Fork flat point solid. We make it in smaller 7mm and 30 caliber configurations, also in 338, 358, 366 caliber, and 375 caliber, plus all of the other common bore diameters up to 510 caliber. So the North Fork flat point solid is my number one recommendation for use on small antelope where you want to minimize hide damage. Now, aside from the North Fork flat point solid, you could use plain old full metal jacket ammo in your 30-06 or something like that. Depending on the cartridge you're using, sometimes you can get a full metal jacket bullet, sometimes you can't though. Plus, you do run the risk with a full metal jacket bullet of having that bullet tumble inside the animal and then making a giant mess on the offside shoulder as it exits, which is the problem we're trying to avoid in the first place. It probably won't happen in a small antelope, but it is more likely with a pointed full metal jacket bullet than with a flat point solid. So we do actually have some 7mm and 30 caliber flat point solids in stock on the North Fork website right now too. Midway USA also has some of those bullets in stock if you want to load those up to use on a tiny 10 hunt or something like that. But very niche, very specific use case for those bullets, but it does fall within the plains game hunting bullet category for this episode. All right, moving on, let's talk about plain old cup and core bullets. These bullets certainly can work and can work very well in Africa. And they are actually very common for use in Africa because for a lot of time, especially many years ago, but even to this day, guys use it because that's what they can get. Availability for ammo and component bullets can be really shaky in Africa. So those guys, unfortunately, just don't typically have the availability of bullets that we have here in North America. But because that's what's available and that's what they use, people have killed dump truckloads of game in Africa, including even really big stuff, with cup and core bullets over the years. Now, in particular, we have stuff manufactured in Africa like PMP bullets and like the Peregrine bullets. I've actually used both on hunts over there. They worked fine. Killed plains game with them. No complaints with them whatsoever. And as far as, say, North American brands, you have, say, the Winchester PowerPoint, Remington Core-Lock, Federal Power Shock, and things like that from the USA. Hornady ELD-X and Interlock also fall into this as well. We'll talk about the ELD-X in particular later. All of these cup and core bullets tend to work best at moderate velocities. And this is one of the reasons why guys like Kevin Robertson emphasize using very heavy for caliber bullets. That's because so many guys in Africa are using a cup and core bullet of whatever type. And like I said, because that's what they got. So a heavier bullet for a given caliber, say for instance, 180 grain versus 150 grain for a 30-06 will be going slower, will also have a higher sectional density, also have more momentum. So for an example here, 175 grain 7mm bullet, 200 or 180 grain, 200, 220 grain 30 caliber bullet for 30-06, 300 Win Mag, whatever. Generally, some sort of combination like that, heavy for caliber bullet going a little bit slower, typically gives you the best combination of good penetration and still good expansion, because these are generally softer bullets. Remember, these aren't partition style bullets. They're not copper. They're not bonded. It's a simple, inexpensive design as you can get. Now, you will still run into problems from time to time, but going heavy for caliber like that gives you the best odds of success if that's what you've got. And it'll still work darn well. And also, too, remember, these bullets are often don't have a high BC, and they're going a little bit slower. I'm not saying they're going slow. I mean, a 180 grain bullet from a 30-06 is still going 2,700 feet per second. That's not something I would shoot an animal at 400 yards with or 500 yards, but it works great at 150 yards and things like that people are most typically taking shots at in Africa. Now, for example, we've actually used the Remington Core-Lock ammo, 250 grain 338 Win Mag factory loads, as in our initial factory loads for our client rifle in South Africa when we first got that 338 Win Mag. Gosh, it's been about 10 years ago now. So that was when we were first getting this rifle set up. We could get Core-Lock ammo. That's what we got. It worked awesome for us. Killed piles of ammo on that first, or excuse me, piles and piles of animals in that first season that we used it. We did eventually switch over to some hand loads with Barnes bullets, but I don't think we had a single issue with the core locks out of that rifle. But 250 grains is a very heavy for caliber bullet for a .338 Win Mag. Now, like I said, though, you can run into problems sometimes. Joseph Von Benedict told a story in his podcast using a 300 H&H, I think with a 220 grain Hornady interlock bullet. Shot a bushbuck with it. Bushbuck are not very big antelope, 90, 100 pounds, something like that. So whitetail deer size, maybe a little bit smaller. Said shot was at about 90 yards, hit it behind the shoulder. The animal dropped right there, but that bullet did not exit. And he said that it went almost completely to pieces within that animal. Remember, sub 100 pound animal, did not hit it right on the shoulder. Like I said, hit behind it. But even with that, you got 7 to 8 inches of penetration with it, bullet almost completely fragmented. Now, the 300 H&H is a powerful round. It's shooting that bullet pretty fast, but still, that's a 220 grain. That's about as heavy as you can get for a 30 caliber bullet. That sort of performance might have led to some problems on a bigger animal, like a kudu or an eland or something like that. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know what the issue was. Maybe he had got a bad batch of those bullets or something. Maybe it was just one of those freak things that happens sometimes with any bullet. But that was something that I mentioned in my episode from last year. I don't recall the episode number for it, but it was my episode on bullet failures. So just search for bullet failures wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can hear that story and many more of people having problems with various bullets over the years. Of note, I mentioned the Federal Power Shock earlier. I was at Safari and Outdoors, which is it's essentially the South African Cabela's, on a recent hunt, and I went into their ammo room and I saw on a shelf they had dozens and dozens of boxes of 270 grain Federal Power Shock ammo for the 375 H&H. There's just a solid wall of blue on that shelf. That is a fantastic bullet for use on plains game, but remember, that is a very big, heavy bullet for a big cartridge. And they're probably using that because that is what they can get. But if that's what you can get, that's fine. It'll probably work just fine for you. Now, I'll talk about another bullet type here briefly, then we'll go into the ELD-X. And so first, we'll talk about the ballistic tip / the ballistic silver tip. It is confusing. There have been several different iterations of this bullet over the years. Right now, Nosler makes a bullet called the ballistic tip. That is a very soft bullet. They advertise for use on deer, pronghorn, things like that. Winchester made a bullet called the ballistic silver tip for many years. Right now, you go to the store, you buy some Winchester ballistic silver tip ammo, it will have a Nosler ballistic tip bullet in it. That was not always the case, though. You go back even, 20 years, 20, 30 years, something like that, and all the way back, say, to the 1940s, 1950s, Winchester made that bullet, and it was very different from the current version of the ballistic tip. The problem with that bullet was sometimes it worked great, sometimes it didn't. Winchester was always tweaking the exact construction of it. Sometimes they would use different types of materials and the different alloys and all that stuff. And there were some instances with it, in some calibers, some bullet weights, where it worked awesome. And some people described it as a controlled expansion bullet, and it would give you good penetration and good expansion. Sometimes, though, in other calibers, other bullet weights, it was extremely soft and would give excessive expansion, very, very little penetration. There was a story I related in that bullet failure episode I mentioned a second ago of a guy using a 300 grain ballistic silver tip bullet out of a 375 on a brown bear in Alaska, shot the bear something like 11 times, and 3 of those bullets penetrated into the body cavity on him. So that batch of those bullets, for whatever reason, was giving terrible penetration. There have been other batches of the 300 grain ballistic silver tip that have worked awesome and truly lived up to that controlled expansion moniker that they were known for. Now, my dad, almost 20 years ago now, was hunting in Namibia, and this was his first safari over there. He's the sort of guy that likes classic lever action rifles. So he brought a couple of them over with iron sights, bigger bore cartridges, not going very fast. Great for use in the bushveld, not so great for the Kalahari. He hunted part of his hunt in a bushveld-like conditions where those rifles work great. Part of it, though, in the more open country of the Kalahari where they were not so good. And when he was there, he was using his professional hunter's 7mm Remington Magnum. Did not realize it at the time, but this ammo was loaded with 140 grain ballistic silver-tip bullets. So very light for caliber, very soft projectiles. And without seeing the bullets and being able to examine them myself, we'll never really know exactly which version of the bullet it was, but I feel like it was one of those older metal tip bullets from Winchester, and probably in a batch that was very soft. While he was hunting in the Kalahari, he got a shot on a beautiful Gemsbach. Great Gemsbach. About 200-ish yards away, shot it squarely on the shoulder, quartering to him, so shot it squarely in that shoulder. Very difficult shot as far as penetration goes for a bullet. Made a great shot on it. Gemsbach went down, but was struggling to get up. Turns out he had crippled this Gemsbach, but not inflicted a fatal wound on it. In the process, they got closer, shot it again, this time a little behind the shoulder, killed the Gemsbach. And when they were skinning it out, they realized that that initial shot did not penetrate into the body cavity. It broke that shoulder blade, inflicted a very serious wound to it, but had they not shot it again, that animal might have gotten up and gotten away. So that is terrible bullet performance. Not at all what you like to see there. But like I said, I think that's one of those older ballistic silver tips that was not so good. So things like that happen over there sometimes. Don't let anybody tell you that bullets will never blow up and not penetrate or any of that stuff, because it absolutely does happen. Fortunately, things like that happening are much more rare today than used to be the case. We have access to a lot of great bullets these days. Even the softer cup and core stuff is still going to perform pretty darn well. You're probably not going to get as good a penetration with it, say with the Winchester PowerPoint or a Core Lock or something like that, as you would with a Barnes or an A-frame or a North Fork or any of that. But it will be better than what I just described, probably what my dad experienced there. This brings me to another very polarizing bullet, the Hornady ELD-X. This is a bullet Hornady designed, very high BC, very sleek bullet, designed to give good expansion at very low impact velocities. They have built some features into it to make it a little bit more robust than it would otherwise have for use at close range at a high impact velocity. Some people love this bullet, some people hate it. I'm of the opinion that this bullet is absolutely outstanding in the use cases that it is designed for and that Hornady recommends it for. Hornady does not recommend using it with impact velocities over 2,500 feet per second. If you call up Hornady customer service right now, that is what they will tell you. If you use it with impact velocities faster than that, you're going to get more expansion and less penetration. I have never experienced the case where the bullet has completely blown up and gone just into tiny, tiny pieces, even at point blank, very high impact velocities like that. And I've shot a lot of stuff with ELD-X bullets, but penetration is definitely less with those bullets under those conditions than anything else I have talked about in this episode. So with that in mind, if you are on a hunt and you know you're not going to be taking a shot past 200-ish yards, the exact distance here really just depends on the cartridge you're using and at what point your velocity is going to get into what Hornady calls the sweet spot for it. They say ideal velocity, impact velocity range for the ELD-X is 1,800 to 2,500 feet per second. So whatever range that is for your cartridge that you're operating within those impact velocities, that is great. For the 6.5 Creedmoor, it's 175, 180 yards, something like that. For others that are going faster, it is farther downrange. But if you know you are not taking a shot past 200 yards, for instance, don't bring an ELD-X bullet. You're going to get subpar penetration. Not saying it won't work, not saying it's going to blow up, any of that stuff, but it is not what I would recommend. Now, I've seen this, experienced it firsthand. Shot an Impala with the 128 grain ELD-X from the 25 Creedmoor on my most recent hunt over in Africa in 2025. 75-yard shot on an Impala, made a good shot on the shoulder with him. It was in the bushveld, and so he was standing in the middle of a dirt road right on the edge of jumping into the forest. Shot him. He kind of staggered, jumped into the forest, went up. I could see where he dug his hooves in to jump when I hit him. Not a single drop of blood on the ground. Looked and looked and looked and looked. Did not find a single drop of blood on the ground. After about 30, 45 minutes, we eventually found that impala. He only went about 50 yards into the bush, but he did not leave a single drop of blood. The bullet did not exit. Now, when we opened up the body cavity of him, I had made a good shot on this impala. And like I said, it didn't go far. It made a very significant wounds to his lungs. But like I described earlier, we had a mained wound track for it and a lot of peppering around it from fragments of this bullet shearing off and inflicting more damage to those lungs. So like I said, fatal wound, clean kill, all of that stuff. We found them, yada, 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 but not what I like to see for that situation. But I was also using it in a situation that it is not designed for. Hornady does not recommend using that bullet under those conditions. This is an example of why. So if you're hunting in the open country, if you're hunting in the Kalahari, in the Karoo, or something like that, wonderful bullet choice. Just use it as Hornady recommends it. And like I said, the bullet did not exit. I recovered it. It was about a 30 grain jacket. Every single piece of lead was stripped out of it. It did not exit the rib cage of that impala. Impala are not very big animals, so just take all that for what you will. I've seen it with my own eyes. There you go. But that's not to say that it won't ever work. It's a terrible choice, any of that stuff, because there's another story I have to tell you about the ELD-X. Brandon Maddox of Silencer Central killed a Cape buffalo with a .338 Lapua shooting a 270 grain ELD-X in South Africa a couple of years ago. I'm not recommending an ELD-X or a .338 Lapua for use on Cape buffalo, but it will clearly work. Now, buffalo are almost as big and tough as an animal gets, but he said he still cleanly killed it, even with that ELD-X projectile. But of note, though, that 270 grain ELD-X has an insanely high sectional density of 0.356. It's also not a super fast load either. Muzzle velocity of only 2,800 feet per second. I don't know the exact circumstances of his shot. I don't imagine it was very far. It was probably 100 yards or in. I don't know exactly where he hit it. But, especially if you hit it a little behind the shoulder or something like that, the ribs on a buffalo are big and they're tough and they're overlapping and all of that. But even a bullet like that will punch through it and still cleanly kill the animal like that. Like I said, that is not what I would recommend doing, but that also just goes to show what that bullet is capable of sometime. Now, I mentioned a listener named Jeff in a recent episode I did on the Creedmoor cartridges. He took a 22 Creedmoor to Africa this past summer, used a couple of different loads out of it, but he did use that 80 grain ELD-X load from Hornady, and he shot a lot of different animals with it. He said in particular that 80 grain ELD-X was absolute death on springbok. He thought it was the absolute perfect load to be using on those animals. He said boom, flop every single time. Absolutely perfect. But he was taking a little bit longer shots. Springboks tend to live in more open country. Springbok also aren't very big either. So it was ideally suited to that situation. Now, he said he used the 22 Creedmoor with that ELD-X bullet on bigger animals too, like Gemsbok, like wildebeest. He said it did not work nearly as well. He said he did not lose anything, but he said his tracking jobs were much longer with it, much more difficult. Very rarely was that bullet exiting, and he said it clearly was not killing these animals nearly as fast as he has made on shots on same animals, same shot placement with something bigger. His favorite is a 7 PRC with a 160 grain CX bullet. He said that is actually his personal favorite for hunting plains game in Africa. So the ELD-X will work, but it is not what I consider ideal for most situations over there. Open country, absolutely use it. It's wonderfully suited for it, but bushveld, thicker shots, whatever, not so much. So really, you just got to use the right tool for the job. I would not use a Swift A-frame or a North Fork semi-spitzer on a hunt for springbok in the Karoo or Gemsbok in the Kalahari, where you're taking a longer range shot. ELD-X, Nosler Accubon long range, things like that, awesome for those situations. ELD-X does not belong in the bushveld, in my opinion. Now, in general, these premium bullets I've talked about are more expensive. The Swift A-frame, Nosler partition, Nosler Accubon, Swift Scirocco, North Fork semi-spitzer. I will say, though, that the cost of the bullet is generally insignificant in terms of the price of the rest of the hunt. So I would say just buy something good and don't worry about it. Don't try to save money on your bullet. Check with your outfitter, too. This is an area where some outfitters have very strong opinions, and I don't want there to be unnecessary conflict. Sometimes an outfitter is going to tell you, you need to use a Barnes bullet or an A-frame or a partition or whatever. And if you don't do what the outfitter recommends and you show up with something else, that's not a good way to start off your hunt. Now, some outfitters will say, hey, use one of these bullets and that's fine. But not everybody's like that, though. So as long as it is okay with your outfitter, as long as you can get it, as long as it shoots well in your rifle, for me, my number one recommendation is the North Fork Semi-Spitzer. If you can't get it or whatever reason, or you doesn't shoot well in your rifle, number two for me is the Nosler partition. But for the most part, we are talking about varying degrees of good with most of these bullets. If your PH is happy with it, your rifle shoots it well, you can get it. Sure, you can use darn near any one of these bullets. They all have pluses and minuses, but for the most part, they'll all work under the right conditions, match the tool to the job. But like I said, varying degrees of good for most of them, especially the premium bullets. Now, I mentioned a few videos over the course of this episode. I will put links in the episode description to them. We have Matt Tyree's video, the veteran hunter that used the Sciroccos, the Hootie Hoo hunt videos, where, among other things, he used those spear impact bullets. We had the podcast hunt video from this past summer, where we had a couple of bullets that were used on it. We had Steve with the CX. Dave used a Barnes bullet out of his 300 short mag. All of us used North Fork Semi-Spitzer bullets in one caliber or another, or on one animal or another. So you get to see a lot of that stuff on display there. Also, my Black Wildebeest video, 375 Ruger, 270 grain TTSX. Check all of that stuff out. You can see what it's like hunting with us in South Africa. You can also see just how some of these bullets and different cartridges performed over there. So let me know what you think of my choices. Leave a comment on this episode or email me, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com. Share your thoughts on your favorite bullets for hunting plains game in Africa. Did I get things right? Did I get something wrong, you think? Did I leave something out? Let me know. Now, I always talk about North Fork bullets in these episodes. And like I mentioned, I am an investor because I think they are an outstanding bullet. Now, specific to this episode, I think the Semi-Spitzer is the best overall projectile for what the vast majority of hunters in Africa need for plains game and for buffalo and inappropriate configurations. Like I said, not that the other stuff won't work or is bad. I just think the North Fork is the best. 100 is better than 99. Now, people often ask me where they can buy loaded ammo with North Fork bullets. Like I mentioned, Hendershots, Pendleton, Lonnie Cribb, loaded ammo in each case. You can get component bullets from the North Fork website or from Midway USA. Reloading International is another big source of North Fork bullets. There are dealers in other countries like Canada and Australia, soon to hopefully be in South Africa as well. Go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/NF. That will take you to the North Fork website. You can order directly from us. We'll ship where legal in the USA, or go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/NF Midway. That will take you to the North Fork section of the Midway USA website. You can see what sort of stuff from us they have available there as well. Now, as we wrap up, if you want to make your dreams of hunting Africa come true, visit bestsafarihunt.com for more details, or email me, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We'll set you up with a great safari for animals like kudu, wildebeest, impala, Cape buffalo, and the like. Let me know you are a podcast listener when you contact me. I will give you a special bonus. And finally, make sure you hit that subscribe button on this episode so you don't miss out on any of my new episodes. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.